about that infamous Y2K bug? Will some computers shut down?
Many here are criticizing the way the refugees were treated, saying Macedonia made an already bad situation even worse.
In the Cold War, it became trite to say that NATO was an alliance looking for a role.
What is it about Hamilton that seems to make it such an employment success? Statisticians have...
This was more than just a remarkable personal triumph. It was redemption for the whole Tour de France. Last year's doping scandal was...
The nurses say they won't go back to work until a deal is signed. Which side will blink first?
May be left to the Prime Minister to determine Canada's position and decide whether or not there will be a magazine deal.
Hello again, I'm Knowlton Nash, and this is News in Review. On this edition, the cost of oil.
The oil companies are just fleecing the consumers.
It's ridiculous.
Pain at the pump as prices rise sharply. Ujjal Dossanjh, Canada's first visible minority premier.
Our first job here today is to pull this party together in solidarity.
Government mismanagement.
Well, indeed, we need to respond to the particular requests. We know what kind of information people are looking for. You know, they're talking about 7 columns, 6 columns.
A minister under attack for out-of-control spending. And Jörg Haider.
And it is stupid to imagine that the whole world is afraid of Mr. Haider.
Austria's right-wing leader sparks a storm of controversy. We begin with our latest energy crisis, which has seen dramatic jumps in gas and oil prices. The increases at the pumps led to truckers' protests all across North America, as operators of big rigs feared they were being squeezed right out of business. And the hikes in prices led to calls for governments to cut their gas taxes or subsidize oil and gas purchases to help consumers heat their homes and run their vehicles. A loud and lengthy protest in Ottawa. Trucks and their drivers jammed Parliament Hill. A similar scene in Newfoundland and Quebec, and on the border between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, where everything came to a standstill.
Until we get some issues dealt with, I'm very sorry to tell you that the trucks are not going to be moving.
Causing all this anger, the skyrocketing price of gas. Here's the CBC's Raj Alawalian.
A sign of the times, a change in the price of gasoline, and you just know it's not going down. It's the same story across Canada. No matter what they drive or where, the end result is inescapable. People are paying more to fill up, and they don't like it.
It's ridiculous.
The oil companies are just fleecing the consumers.
Not happy about it.
I think it's unfair that they're going up so much.
I'd like to know when the prices are going to stop going up.
Oh, I think it's crazy. What are we going to do?
It's even worse for truck drivers. The price of diesel has more than doubled over the past year.
Not worth it. Costs too much.
Canadians have never seen gas prices like these, not even during the last oil crisis, almost a decade ago when the Gulf War was on. This pollster says the public feels ripped off.
We found that 80% of the people that we polled, in fact, indicated that they felt that this wasn't a circumstance of free market forces. They felt that it was, in fact, an unfair, almost price gouging.
The price rise over this past winter made things especially hard in Atlantic Canada. For many people there, oil is the main source for heat, and soaring costs had them shivering in the cold. Here's the CBC's Daryl McIntyre.
It's freezing in here, so...
Their old house has always been hard to heat, but Mercedes Barry and Val Actall say these days it's almost impossible.
Last year in April we were paying 33 cents a litre, and today I ordered it and it was 52 cents, point something.
Dennis O'Keefe heads a group fighting for lower fuel prices.
And in some cases where you have seniors and people on low incomes and fixed incomes, they're actually having to choose between how much food they'll buy and how much heat they'll have.
In fact, the price jump has hit right across Atlantic Canada, where roughly half the homes are heated with oil. On average, a tank that cost $250 last year now costs $400. Not everyone is agonizing, though. Skyrocketing crude oil prices that are driving up the cost of heating oil are also fueling a boom in the offshore industry, which is fueling a boom in the region's economy.
Well, the same
But
thing.
that's cold comfort for people like Val Ekdahl.
You know, tell that to some pensioner who's like 80 years old and likely freezing because they can't afford to buy their oil.
She says she'll take a warm house over a booming economy any day.
In Western Canada, there was mixed reaction to rising crude oil prices. It was bad news for farmers already dealing with crushing debt. But for anyone in the oil industry, it was quite a different story, as the CBC's Paul Hunter tells us.
Every minute of every day, they're pumping oil in Alberta. So when the world price of oil goes up, so do profits for those doing the pumping. Today, Imperial Oil, which owns Esso stations across the country, announced its third quarter profits. They're up 77% over last year's. Thanks to oil prices nearly doubling in 12 months, profits throughout the industry are up a lot. Third quarter profits for Petro-Canada are up 634% over last year. At Pan-Canadian Petroleum, they're up 518%. And at Alberta Energy Company, one of the country's biggest energy producers, third quarter profits are 825% higher than they were last year. It's already having a big impact here. Taxes are coming down, buildings are going up. Because of the oil patch, Calgary is booming.
Calgary is doing very well.
And, says this economics professor, even if oil prices do drop, the industry and the rest of the economy here is now strong enough to carry on.
If there is a tough time coming around the corner, you know, OPEC falls apart or whatever, if there's a tough time, they're ready to face it. And I think what you're dealing with here is an Alberta economy that's learned to be resilient.
Whatever happens in the oil patch depends a lot on OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC gets most of the blame for high prices at the pumps, but there may be more to it than that. Here's the CBC's Eric Sorensen.
A lot of fingers are pointing at OPEC for driving up prices. It's an obvious target. Countries in the oil-producing cartel succeeded over the last year in cutting their output and reducing the supply of oil. OPEC did that after it saw the price of oil drop from about $20 a barrel in 1997 to around $10 in '98. The demand created by the cutback has pumped up the price of oil to about $30 a barrel.
Consumers are being shafted by the OPEC cartel and the big oil companies, and the Liberals do nothing about it.
I know the NDP believes that governments are omnipotent and they can control world prices. I don't think that we can do that.
Perhaps not, but governments, federal and provincial, can control the taxes they collect from gasoline sales. The Canadian Automobile Association has been tracking taxes and gas prices and says governments cannot sidestep their role in today's high gas prices. Since 1984, combined provincial federal excise taxes on gasoline have risen from 6.5 cents a litre to 29.6 cents. The total tax haul, says the CAA, is about $10 billion a year. On top of that, when gas prices go up, the federal government rakes in more from the GST. A price hike from 57 cents a litre to 67 cents earns Ottawa a $200 million annual GST bonus.
Over the last 15 years, taxes on fuel have gone up dramatically, and what we're seeing for the first time is that impact of the increase in taxation at the same time when you have the world price of oil hitting that $30 level.
And analysts say fuel prices will probably rise more, with impacts yet to be felt throughout the transportation sector and the rest of the Canadian economy.
Because if those oil prices start feeding back into a whole range of other prices and lead people generally to believe that inflation is rising and will continue to rise, then we do have a problem.
So what can governments do? These days, after years of trying to balance the books, finance ministers, like Paul Martin in Ottawa, don't want to run into debt again. So they don't have any easy solutions to make gas cheaper again. It was a different story back in the 1970s when the first big energy crisis hit. North Americans were in shock. Until that point, they'd assumed that gas would always be cheap and always be plentiful. Then OPEC drastically cut production. Prices soared. It was common to see long lines of people waiting to buy whatever gas they could. Sometimes there wasn't any. In Canada, the Liberal government of Pierre Trudeau dipped into our own oil reserves, trying to ride out the crisis. The move did help keep prices down a bit. But in retrospect, many experts feel it cost Ottawa a lot in lost revenues, which was bad for the economy. And in terms of the environment, it just encouraged people to keep gassing up. Today, history seems to be repeating itself with another energy crisis. Prices are high, and once again, people are worried. Yet they keep on driving. As the CBC's Kelly Crow reports, it may be time to rethink our love affair with the automobile.
Not too happy about it, but what are you going to do?
Another expensive day for Canadian drivers.
I have no choice but to pay what they're asking.
You have to keep driving, and not much you can do. You know, it's highway robbery.
These may be the highest gas prices in Canada in a decade, but compared to Europe, these prices are cheap. Just ask these British drivers.
One word, extortion.
Very expensive, too much tax on it.
These drivers are paying the Canadian equivalent of $1.80 a litre, and $1.40 of that is tax. It's the same story across Europe. In France, it costs $1.51 a litre, and $1.12 of that is tax. In Italy, it's $1.48 a litre, and $1.02 is tax. A deliberate government strategy forcing people to pay for the privilege of driving. The effect? People drive less, and they drive smaller, more fuel-efficient cars.
It does, yeah. It makes you think about taking the car. Definitely.
You get the car that will give you the most mileage.
With traffic poisoning the air, creating greenhouse gas, and making people sick, some people argue gas prices could be even higher here to force people to switch from big cars to smaller cars or to get out of their cars altogether.
It's a wasting of the Earth's natural resources, and it's a wasting of people's lives, and we say that it should be cheap. Well, it isn't cheap, and we should pay the whole price.
1973, the world's first energy crisis. Cars got smaller, public transit expanded, and scientists were looking for new sources of fuel. All of that based on gas selling at just 45 cents a litre in today's prices. But gas supplies didn't run out, and almost 30 years later, cars are bigger and investment in public transit has dropped. People are moving to houses even further from the city, and at the Toronto Auto Show, it's giant sport utility vehicles that are getting all the attention.
Higher gas prices does have a green silver lining, and that green silver lining is that people may have to think twice before they buy those big vehicles, and think twice before they think whether or not they can have to have a vehicle, whether or not they can rely on public transportation.
But environmentalists admit it's an optimistic view that's a long way from being realized. With sales of light trucks rising to half of all new car sales, they say gas prices will have to get a lot higher before fuel efficiency becomes fashionable again.
Coming up on News and Review, Ujjal Dossanjh, the first Canadian Premier who is also a member of a visible minority. Canada has its first Premier who is a member of a visible minority. He's Ujjal Dossanjh. The ruling New Democrats in British Columbia picked him to be their new leader in mid-February, and that automatically made him the province's new Premier. Dossanjh came to Canada from India. He's a Sikh, and in many ways, his journey from sawmill worker to BC Premier echoes the changes in his own community of Sikhs, South Asians, and Canadians. It is a history of controversy, of racism, and violence, and Dossanjh has played a prominent role in that history over the last few decades. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were about 2,000 people from India living in North America. Most came from the province of Punjab and settled in British Columbia. By 1996, South Asians numbered more than 500,000, and 147,000 of them were Sikh. In the mid-1980s, the CBC's John Kalina prepared a documentary on Sikhs in Canada.
For 5 centuries, Sikh history has largely taken place here, where the religion started, in northwestern India, in an area called the Punjab, some of which is now in Pakistan, some in India. Mongols, Mughals, and Afghans, as well as the British, have fought over and through the Punjab. And this has given the Sikhs more than their share of martyrs, and the sense of themselves as spiritual warriors, fighting against great odds for the freedom of their faith. Around the turn of the century, when the first Sikh immigrants came to this country, the sun had not yet set on the British Empire, and the Sikhs were very much the loyal and stalwart soldiers of British India. And so they thought that Canada, as part of the same empire, would certainly welcome them as immigrants. They were wrong. Behind me is Cole Harbour in Vancouver, the site of the Komagata-Maru incident. In 1914, Canadian society was overtly racist and anti-immigrant, at least anti-Asian. The Canadian Immigration Act had even been amended specifically to keep Sikhs out. The change simply said that in order to immigrate to Canada, you had to purchase a single ticket from your country of origin all the way to Canada. And since no steamship lines went from India to Canada, this meant that no Sikhs could legally come here. That is, unless they chartered their own boat, which was exactly what a group of enterprising Sikhs did in 1914. But when the Komagata-Maru arrived in Vancouver Harbor, the authorities didn't just give up and let them in. In fact, they never allowed the boat to dock or the people to get off. Negotiations went on for 2 months. During that time, authorities wouldn't even allow food and water to be sent to the boat. Finally, after a sham of an immigration hearing, the Canadian Navy escorted the Komagata-Maru out of the harbor and sent it back to India. Canada would be kept white. Some enterprising Sikhs did manage to get into Canada before the immigration laws stiffened, but given the climate of prejudice, their lives were difficult. They were used as cheap labor, paid less than whites, and denied the most basic rights. Living conditions were poor or worse, and since women were not allowed to come and join their husbands, it was essentially an all-male society. Sikhs, even those born in Canada, were not allowed to vote, a right they would not get until 1947. Sikhs were not allowed to become lawyers or pharmacists or serve on juries.
The Sikhs moved into the lumber business and into farming in the Fraser Valley. It was a relatively peaceful existence until events back in India split the community. Some Sikhs had been supporting an independent Sikh homeland called Khalistan. That campaign had started when the British still ruled India and continued after the country's independence. The separatist movement had its spiritual headquarters in the Harimandir Sahib, or the Temple of God in Amritsar. We know the complex in Amritsar better as the Golden Temple. Sikhs consider it their most sacred temple. In June 1984, then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, ordered the army to clear out the separatists. That set off a brutal and very bloody period in modern Sikh history.
The bloodletting began in earnest on the 5th of June, 1984. Codenamed Operation Blue Star, the Indian Army, on orders from Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, attacked the Golden Temple. Inside were a large number of Sikh separatists, heavily armed, and led by Sant Jarnail Bhindranwale. The charismatic preacher was a leading proponent of a separate Sikh state named Khalistan. The commando attack left heavy casualties, over 1,200 dead, including Bhindranwale. The invasion of the temple proved more costly still. It enraged the vast majority of Sikhs who did not support the radical extremists. And less than 5 months later, on October 31st, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards. Over the next 4 days, riots flared up across the country, Hindus exacting revenge on innocent Sikhs. 2,500 Sikhs were massacred in New Delhi alone. And then Sikh terrorism began to take its toll. May 10th, 1985, a series of bombs are set off around India. Sikh terrorists are blamed. 80 people are dead and 150 wounded. June 23rd, 1985, Air India Flight 182, bound for New Delhi, explodes off the coast of Ireland. Sikh extremists are again suspected, and all 329 aboard are killed. November 30th, 1986, 4 Sikh extremists hijack a bus in rural Punjab and kill the 22 Hindu passengers. And the following July again, Sikh extremists stop buses in the Punjab and execute 72 Hindus on board.
The violence continued through much of the 80s. Some of Canada's Sikhs supported independence for Khalistan at any cost. Others wanted nothing to do with the movement and the violence that it provoked. The two sides clashed, sometimes violently. Ujjal Dossanjh spoke out against the violence.
We have lived under basically communal fascism, religious fascism of a very few individuals for a period of almost 6 months to a year.
And he almost paid for that candor with his life.
I left my office at about 4:45 in the evening, and my car was about 50 feet away. I walked to my car, and the next thing I know is a huge figure standing in front of my eyes, and I'm being hit on my head with an iron bar. I had 80 stitches on my head and 2 fingers broken on my right hand.
The man charged with the attack belonged to the group advocating a separate Sikh state. He was not convicted. But that didn't stop Dossanjh from continuing to speak out.
These people are trying to take us out of the mainstream of life here and take us back into the religious shell and make us seek our identity only through this religious fanaticism.
Canada's Sikh community saw itself being labeled as bloodthirsty fanatics, despite the fact that many of them said they had little or nothing in common with the independence movement for Khalistan. Then in July of 1987, a tramp freighter arrived on the shores of Nova Scotia, and 174 South Asians walked out of the morning fog into a small fishing village looking for political asylum. They said they were Sikhs fleeing for their lives. Dossanjh was among those who were skeptical of their claim.
It was a bad thing for the Canadian Sikh community at large. However, it was a good thing and a boon to the cause of those who want to show to the world that there is a separatist movement in India. And I think that on that line, along that line, the community is divided.
But Dossanjh had other concerns besides Sikh politics. One was what he called the racist exploitation of immigrant farmer workers.
But when it really comes to certain visible ethnic minorities, we as a society don't give a damn.
Dossanjh had joined the New Democratic Party shortly after arriving in Canada. He was especially active on labor issues. He was first elected to the provincial legislature in 1991, then again in 1996. He held various cabinet positions, but he came to prominence when he became the province's Attorney General. He gained a reputation as a no-nonsense law and order AG, a reputation earned during the armed standoff by a group of Native people at Gustafson Lake. Dossanjh called the dispute a law enforcement problem, not a political issue, a position that proved to be a popular one. He was also a strong advocate of women's rights. He set up a toll-free line so that victims of crime and people with protection orders could find out when convicts were being released. And he made history as the first BC Attorney General to appear before the Supreme Court of Canada. He went there to fight for a longer sentence for a man convicted of murdering his wife. And while the New Democratic Party ruled British Columbia throughout the 90s, it was a troubled decade. The CBC's Rex Murphy prepared this report on the NDP's problems in office.
First of all, I'm not going to resign.
No matter what.
I'm not going to resign.
Eventually, he had to. The irony of Harcourt's resignation lies in the fact that his term was supposed to provide the NDP with the very stability and balance it so desperately needed.
I think most New Democrats now look back rather fondly on his time in office, and he's involved in transition to the new government that's being planned. But it's true, Harcourt's time in office was plagued by this long-running scandal over bingo money. Essentially, the governing party accused of stealing money from the very causes New Democrats have already stood up for. Literally, widows and orphans.
I need your help to win the NDP leadership, and with your help, we'll win the next election.
After Harcourt, after Bingogate, for a very brief while, Glenn Clark worked a miracle for the NDP. He won an election against heavily favored Liberals. His drive and fighting spirit was the opposite of Harcourt. The party took heart. The bloom faded in a day. The savior became an albatross almost overnight, with the news that Clark had fudged the budget as part of his election.
They said we couldn't do it, and here it is. Here's the proof right here.
Clark and the NDP's next big problem with numbers came with the BC Ferry Project, a plan to build 4 high-tech ferries which soon had voters yearning for the good old days of Bingogate. The fast ferry project on top of the fudged budget was lethal. Costs soared, public confidence sank. It gets more complicated. In the heat of the ferry fury, Clark brings in a former leader of the Liberal Party, Gordon Wilson, to shore up his cabinet and fix the problem. Wilson had been dumped by the Liberals and started his own party before joining the NDP.
It's the RCMP.
This was the capper for Clark and the NDP. The RCMP seen on BC television raiding the Premier's house in connection with an investigation concerning the granting of casino licenses. The showing of this video earned Clark some sympathy, but the public wearied, and then the Attorney General, Ujjal Dossanjh, made this fatal announcement.
The Premier is under criminal investigation.
Following that announcement, BC's sharp, tumultuous ride with Glenn Clark as Premier was over.
I've concluded it would be wrong for me to continue.
His term had sent the party tumbling. The NDP was racked internally and externally. Time for a change.
Ujjal Dossanjh led the race to replace Clark as party leader and premier. Moderate, secular Sikhs backed him. Religious Sikhs did not. They threw their support behind another member of the cabinet, Mo Sahota, who was also a Sikh. But he dropped out early in the race and started working to support the candidacy of Gordon Wilson. The two were very loyal to Clark, and they were determined that the man who pushed their friend out of office should not get his job. Sahota made an impassioned speech for Wilson at the convention.
I have a passion for the environment. I care about working families. I feel for those living in poverty.
But Wilson withdrew just before the vote.
I and my delegates will be moving to support Corky Evans.
Now all the other candidates had thrown their support behind the folksy former lumber worker, Corky Evans.
Ujjal Dossanjh, 769. Corky Evans, 549.
That announcement heralded the arrival of South Asians, especially Sikhs, to the center of power in British Columbia. On February the 24th, Dossanjh took office as the Premier of British Columbia. The CBC's Terry Malewski was there.
In the city that made British Columbia British, the sitar and the tabla filled the air at the Lieutenant Governor's mansion, and the guests snacked on Indian pakoras. Friends and family gathered to celebrate the rise of a man whose grandfather went to a British jail fighting for the independence of India.
I, Ujjal Dossanjh.
Ujjal Dossanjh didn't even speak English until he was 17 years old. Now, Her Majesty's Lieutenant Governor Gardy Gardam has sworn him in to the top job in BC.
And the 33rd Premier of the province of British Columbia.
Thank you. When I started my journey on December 31st, 1964, leaving India at the age of 17, little did I know, think, or imagine that I would be standing here before you today being called Premier Dossanjh.
How long he will be Premier is the question now. Dossanjh has only 1 year to pull his battered party together before he must call an election, which the pundits say will be an uphill struggle. Still, for Ujjal Dossanjh, that is normal.
Next, government mismanagement.
I think this thing has been a political slush fund.
It's really very pervasive, and it's pretty serious.
Charges that millions of dollars in federal job grants are unaccounted for. The Liberal government and one of its key ministers have been under intense opposition pressure over the way they handled federal job creation grants. An audit revealed, among other things, sloppy or non-existent paperwork and lack of accountability in the way the money was handed out. And there were charges of political favoritism, claims that money was channeled more often than not to Liberal ridings instead of being distributed strictly on the basis of need. And the minister in the hot seat, Jane Stewart, wasn't even in the job when the troubles surfaced.
Stop about there, man.
Stuart, will you release the information that the opposition parties want?
That's Jane Stewart, the Human Resources Minister, in the middle of all those reporters and cameras. It's called a scrum, a group of journalists surrounding a person and firing away with questions. Most scrums aren't this big and chaotic, but it shows the kind of pressure Stewart has been under.
Well, indeed, we need to respond to the particular requests. We know what kind of information people are looking for.
Why did you keep stalling?
The scrum took place 3 weeks after the news broke that a financial audit had found problems with the way huge amounts of money were handled by her department.
This is all about the management of $1 billion worth of taxpayers' money. Money used, among other things, to promote industrial programs in PEI, to hire disabled workers in Edmonton, to create jobs in the Prime Minister's riding in Quebec. Programs that fall under the direction of the Human Resources Development Department, a department slammed in this internal audit, an audit that's put the minister on the defensive.
My way is not to sweep it under the carpet, but to make it open.
The audit reviewed 459 project files and found a litany of accounting and administration errors. 15% did not contain any funding applications. Nearly 70% of the files had no explanation for why a project was accepted or rejected. 87% had no evidence of supervision. And in more than 30% of the projects, the amount of money approved was later increased, often without explanation.
It doesn't necessarily mean the decisions were wrong. In fact, that doesn't necessarily mean that at all. What it means is that we don't have the proper documentation.
I think this thing has been a political slush fund.
Reform's Diana Blonsey spent much of this fall hounding the government over its jobs program. She says Stewart is only releasing the audit now because Reform had requested it under access to information. And from the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, surprise at the level of mismanagement.
It's really very pervasive and it's pretty serious.
Maria Baratos says managing grants and programs is routine government business with established rules to avoid political abuse.
Now, once that kind of paperwork isn't there, then anything can happen. There could be no abuse. There could be abuse, but you have no way of knowing.
The Human Resources Department handles $60 billion, more money than any other part of the federal government. Millions of Canadians rely on it for checks under the Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, and disability benefits. And there's the money the department has been handing out in grants to companies. The idea is to create jobs, but the program has been facing criticism for a long time.
I, Jane Stewart, do solemnly...
Last summer, soon after Jane Stewart was sworn in as Human Resources Minister, the opposition started asking her about the way money was being handed out, particularly to the Prime Minister's riding.
We have now learned that both trust funds broke Treasury Board guidelines and one even illegally violated the Financial Administration Act.
Mr. Speaker, this program worked and it worked well for Canadians.
Stewart said she wouldn't resign, and she said her deputy minister had given new orders to all the department's workers.
I, too, have been talking to the employees and saying, there's no witch hunt here, but boy, we've got to do a better job because Canadians depend on us.
After a couple of weeks of struggling to explain the problems in her department, Stewart started getting some help from the person who gave her the job of Human Resources Minister in the first place.
The Prime Minister came to work this morning knowing his government is facing perhaps the biggest controversy of this mandate. The minister defended the programs, defended her handling of the release of the audit a full 3 months after its completion.
You will find them.
When were you?
Her answers didn't satisfy reporters.
Listen, I'm coming to that, okay?
After 7.5 minutes, Jane Stewart's boss appeared. He hesitated.
We've got this preliminary finding in
$5
billion.
Then, with a quick word to the minister, he came back to the microphone and took over.
We're not, no, we take responsibilities. Yes, we're fixing the problem.
$1 billion.
Late this afternoon, 2 top bureaucrats from Stewart's department held a briefing for reporters.
This is not a big fiasco.
For over an hour, they defended the programs, defended their decision to wait months before briefing the minister on the problems in the department, and argued reporters were overplaying how much money was at stake.
We know where every penny went.
No money is missing. That was the message of the day from a government under siege. But while officials say they know where every check went, they can't say how the money was spent. And so far, they have not released the details or the documents from the individual cases in the audit.
Back in 1993, when this government was elected, it promised good management. 6 years later, mismanagement is the word being used to describe the problems in a key department. But despite almost daily calls for the minister to resign, she hung in. In fact, there haven't been many cabinet ministers in this current Liberal government who've had to resign. Only 3 have quit.
I do accept responsibility for my conversation and its consequences.
A couple of years ago, Andy Scott resigned as Solicitor General. He quit after another MP overheard him talking on a plane. The conversation allegedly prejudged the outcome of an inquiry. In 1996, David Collinet resigned as Defense Minister.
I've offered my resignation today as Minister of National Defense and Veterans Affairs to the Prime Minister.
He had sent a letter to immigration officials on behalf of someone in his riding. He's back in the cabinet now as Transport Minister. Then there's Sheila Copps.
Straight in the eye, and I think that the only way to clear the air is to step down and put my fate in the hands of the people.
She's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Heritage now. But in 1996, she quit because in the previous election campaign, she'd promised to if her party did not get rid of the GST. She got her job back after a by-election. The question about whether Jane Stewart should resign is also a question of where her responsibilities lie. Jane Stewart may have to answer most of the questions about why millions of dollars were given out by her department without basic paperwork. She may have to respond to the allegations that the writings of Liberal ministers were being favored. But in fact, she wasn't in charge of the department when most of the problems occurred. This man was. He's Pierre Pettigrew, now International Trade Minister. He was the Human Resources Minister when the audit was done. 2 weeks after the results of that audit became public knowledge, he talked to reporters. He told them that when he handed the job over to Jane Stewart, he didn't know what the audit had found.
I thought it was a big department, a very important department because it's people-oriented, and what counts so very much is to really help Canadian citizens, and I think the department is doing a fine job.
Of course, reporters can ask Pettigrew all the questions they want, but in the House of Commons, it's a different story. The rules say that the opposition cannot ask Pettigrew questions about his old cabinet job. So he was off the hook when Parliament resumed after a midwinter break.
The resumption of Parliament was preceded by a supercharged build-up. There was a minister in trouble, a prime minister determined to defend her, and an opposition hunting for a political head.
Why doesn't the Prime Minister start accepting responsibility for this gross misuse of taxpayers' money and fire that minister? Right on. Here, here, here.
The leader of the opposition reminded the Commons the first sign of trouble at Human Resources stemmed from job creation grants in the Prime Minister's riding.
The issue is a $1 billion boondoggle involving public money. That's the issue.
There is no $1 billion that has been lost. We know where the money is. It is in the riding of all the members of Parliament in this House.
And I want the Canadian public to know that all this money is going for the Opportunity Funds, which helps Canadians with disabilities find jobs, literacy programs, youth internship, Youth Services Canada.
In the post-question period frenzy, opposition parties insisted. Jane Stewart said in the Commons last fall there was nothing wrong, when she knew that was not the case.
She has been covering up information. The only way to find out what happened is to have an independent investigation by people who are not associated with the minister or with the department and have that accountable to Parliament.
As the minister faced the questions in the House of Commons, the department released more details about the job grants.
Barry Lindeman doesn't know what all the fuss is about. He has a job because the Paraplegic Association in Calgary got more than $1 million from the Human Resources Development Department.
When I saw, there was some questions about it, I thought, geez, I wish I could shout from the rooftops. Look what it did for me.
The program that got Barry his job was praised by the Prime Minister and by the association that received the money.
We're looking at 250 job opportunities and securing 209 jobs throughout the province.
In Ottawa, documents by the boxload released by the Human Resources Development Department listing all the programs still under investigation.
We are now in the field taking a close look at all of these cases.
The public servants from the Human Resources Department say the whole audit mess now boils down to 37 projects worth about $33 million. For example, the bureaucrats say they're investigating a $2.5 million grant given to cable giant Videotron. The grant was supposed to create 500 permanent jobs, but the audit claims most new jobs are temporary, not permanent, and Videotron can't account for all the money it was sent. Videotron says it sent all the proper paperwork to the government. The government lost the documents. Or this example, a $160,000 grant for a literacy program at McGill University. It's under investigation now because the audit showed it only asked for $60,000 but received that and $100,000 more. The vice principal says the explanation is simple. They qualified for more than they requested.
For the opposition parties, that review meant knowing exactly which ridings got money. They demanded a list of all the grants, a list that would reveal whether ridings held by Liberal members of Parliament received more than ridings represented by opposition members of Parliament. The government insisted that grants were handed out fairly, but the opposition kept asking about certain ridings. Jane Stewart's, for example.
Mr. Speaker, in order to qualify for Canada Jobs Fund grants, a riding must have an unemployment rate of greater than 10%, according to 1997 figures. This past November the 1st in 1999, the HRD minister approved 2 CJF grants totaling $640,000 in her very own riding, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister confirm these facts?
First, as I mentioned, I did not authorize them because I delegated the authority for decisions in my riding to the deputy minister. And secondly, the employment region in which my riding falls was 10.3%.
There were also a lot of questions about the Prime Minister's riding in Quebec. Of the 9 police investigations into the awarding of grants, 3 are focused on Jean Chrétien's riding. Still to come, Jörg Haider.
He is a populist who is willing to use every instrument which helps him to get power.
The right-wing Austrian who's got political tempers flaring over his apparent neo-Nazi policies. Jörg Haider used to be just the right-wing governor of an Austrian province, but after his party won the balance of power in recent national elections, he's become the poster boy for the resurgence of Nazism in Europe. This media-savvy son of former Nazi Party members has become the spokesman for a new xenophobia spawned by fears of rampant non-European immigration. Haider isn't the first Austrian whose Nazi affiliations have landed him in hot water. A few years ago, no less than United Nations Secretary General and Austrian President Kurt Waldheim attracted worldwide scorn when it was found that he had hidden his Nazi past. Austrians have been trying to distance themselves from the Nazi horrors of the past century, trying to live down that Adolf Hitler was a native Austrian, and that the country welcomed him with open arms when he annexed Austria to his German Reich before the Second World War. Jörg Haider's Freedom Party is not the only prominent right-wing party in Europe. France and Belgium, for example, have similar movements. But Haider has stirred emotions and provoked protests like no one else in recent European politics. And while his rise to influence and power seemed to catch people off guard, it didn't happen overnight. The first warning came 7 years ago.
In the pristine town of Baden bei Wien and in communities across Austria, the opposition Freedom Party is waging a low-key but persistent campaign. Its signs urge people to put Austria and Austrians first. It's pushing a controversial petition with 12 proposals for new laws. They range from a ban on immigration until the economy improves to restrictions on students whose mother tongue is not German. On this morning, there is a slow but steady trickle of people ready to sign. People like Puspischil Waltrode, who quotes the Freedom Party line that foreign students are starting to dominate Austrian schools. She claims Turkish students are violent at her son's high school. Others are wary of the petition. Those who have taken refuge from the snow in the nearby Café Central read about it in the newspapers. Evelina Reisel says she won't sign. She believes there are too many illegal immigrants in Austria, but the petition, she says, smacks of racism. Racism is the accusation most often leveled at the man behind the petition, Jörg Haider. Right-wing extremists in Austria admire him. Vandals have written Heil Haider on Jewish gravestones, an uneasy reminder of Austria's Nazi past. Roughly 1/5 of Austria's electorate voted for Haider's Freedom Party in the last election. Hemmed in by bulletproof glass, he plays to fears over high unemployment, crime, and housing shortages. He links those problems to refugees and economic migrants. He even charges Muslim parents are forcing crucifixes out of schools in predominantly Catholic Austria. We didn't win the Turkish wars hundreds of years ago to be forced back to this, he tells the crowd. But away from his supporters, Haider tones down the rhetoric.
We only look to have a correct political system and to protect the social freedom in our country.
It is this seemingly reasonable side that appeals to a growing number of blue-collar workers. It's expected Haider will get more than the 100,000 names he needs to force a parliamentary debate on his petition. His critics worry that's the first step in legitimizing the view that taking away the rights of foreigners is the way to deal with Austria's economic problems.
That was back in 1993. Today, Haider is more popular and more powerful than ever, and concern in Europe and the rest of the West continues to grow.
Austria's image of prosperity and calm has been suddenly and radically changed. And this is the man responsible, Jörg Haider, leader of the Freedom Party. For some, a neo-Nazi hiding behind layers of charm and false moderation, most often cast as a xenophobe and right-wing extremist. But whose party won 27% of the vote in the last election, making it a potential and disturbing partner in the next government after the Social Democrats failed to build a new coalition.
Democracy means change.
Haider and his followers are indignant at Europe's meddling, the reaction and the threats, and the accusation that he's a racist or a crypto-Nazi. He spent the week offering reassurances, demanding fair judgment.
The people in Europe can be confident that we are standing on the basis of democracy, of human rights, and of the common values which are represented in Europe.
Austria's ethnic community may be justifiably nervous. Haider would close the borders to immigrants, and he once praised what he called Hitler's orderly employment practices.
One can no longer describe Austria as a quiet little corner of Europe where nothing seems to happen. The rise of Jörg Haider and his Freedom Party has provoked a fundamental clash of ideals here between tolerance and democracy. And more than that, an unprecedented threat of retaliation, isolation from the rest of Europe.
2 days after this report, Haider signed a pledge renouncing Austria's Nazi past and promising to uphold traditional European values. But the promise didn't silence his critics, and back in Austria, Haider seemed to revel in the notoriety.
The echoes of history resonate around Vienna's immense imperial palace. On this balcony, Hitler stood and harangued an adoring Austrian multitude. But little in Austria's long centuries as an empire or its short decades as a democracy had quite resembled this. In what was once the imperial courtyard, riot police dodged eggs and held back protesters. While inside, politicians did what politicians do, signing an agreement forming a coalition government. But one of these men was no ordinary politician. He's the leader of the extreme right Freedom Party, Jörg Haider. A man who lauds Nazis and bitterly divides his country, driving his opponents into unprecedented demonstrations in the streets. And not least, he infuriates the rest of Europe. At the center of this political storm, Haider waltzed serenely. This was Carinthia, his home province. His party was celebrating its astonishing rise to power. Jörg Haider has advanced through Austrian politics in a hail of mud and roses. Brutal descriptions such as demagogue, racist, and neo-Nazi do battle with expressions of praise. such as modernizing reformer and populist insurgent against a complacent, crony-ridden establishment. The fact is that Haider is an ambiguous figure, deliberately and disturbingly so, in a country that has long cultivated ambiguity in dealing with its past and its politics.
Español, Berlin.
Like technological courtiers, the world's media came to Carinthia to pay him homage. He's the governor here. He pretended not to understand why European governments and Canada have decided to limit contacts with a government that contains his party.
And it is stupid to imagine that the whole world is afraid of Mr. Haider. He's the leader of a 27% party in Austria. It's unbelievable that the whole world is afraid. Mr. Clinton is afraid of Mr. Haider. Perhaps he's afraid that I take a competition with him at the marathon in New York. Then he has to be afraid, because I am much quicker than he.
Jörg Haider is his country's first lifestyle politician, an aging Peter Pan who runs, who skis, who bungee jumps, a master of the modern and a political chameleon. This is Klagenfurt, the capital of the Alpine province of Carinthia, the world of Haider's youth. It was a provincial world of poverty and of Nazi values. Both his mother and his father were unrepentant followers of Hitler. His father joined the Nazi Party in 1929. His parents' beliefs would shape their son's life.
Dass ein immer kleiner werdender Prozentsatz
Haider was hungry for political acceptance. At 20, he became the head of the Freedom Party's youth wing. He drank and sang at gatherings of extreme right-wing students.
Der Kantor intoniere zur ersten.
Haider's past disturbs because it echoes that of his country. This is dangerous territory. Hitler swept into Vienna in 1938 after Nazi Germany had annexed the country. He was greeted by rapturous crowds. After the war, that was quickly and conveniently forgotten. So was much else. An abandoned, overgrown Jewish cemetery in Vienna is haunting in its evocation of a world destroyed, a population decimated. But this is a past most Austrians have not wanted to visit. In Carinthia, the Nazi past looks different. In the early 90s, veterans of Hitler's armies marched proudly with their medals. And Haider marched with them. He praised SS veterans as men of character.
Dr. Haider zum Landeshauptmann von Kärnten gewählt.
He was then, as now, the provincial governor, a triumph he had marked with his mother. In the same assembly, he chose to praise Hitler's labor policies.
Das hat es im Dritten Reich nicht gegeben. Beim Dritten Reich haben sie also ordentliche Beschäftigungspolitik gemacht, was nicht einmal ihre Regierung in Wien zusammenbringt. Das muss man nachweisen, no?
But last fall, Haider decided to distance himself from his praise of Hitler's policies.
Freilich hat es in der Vergangenheit auch einige Äußerungen gegeben, die mir zugeordnet werden, die im Zusammenhang mit dem Nationalsozialismus gewesen sind, die durchaus unsensibel oder missverständlich waren. Das tut mir persönlich leid. Erstens, weil ich, glaube ich, damit Gefühle von Menschen verletzt habe, die selbst oder deren Angehörige Opfer des Nationalsozialismus gewesen sind.
You think that he himself is racist?
He's just a populist. He's a populist who is willing to use every instrument which helps him to get power. I think that's its ultimate goal.
Such scorn from Heidi Schmidt is born of inside knowledge. She was once Haider's candidate for Austrian president. She broke with him out of disgust at his racist policies.
So it doesn't matter for him. Today he says this and tomorrow he will apologize. The thing is that he knows that the meaning has reached people, they want to hear it. So he can apologize on the next day because the meaning is here and he will do it again, I'm sure. Maybe not in the next weeks, maybe not in the next month, because everyone will look at him, but it's in him.
As the charismatic yuppie populist, Haider has played what one critic calls the piano of social anxiety. It's a sour sonata performed by a master musician. His election slogan last fall said, "We guarantee to stop over-foreignness, the flood of immigrants." Austria is a country of fewer than 8 million people. In Vienna, where almost 15% of the residents are outsiders, such crude calls have created growing disquiet among immigrants.
I'm a little bit afraid about the new station in Austria, because this Haider is very populist. I don't know what he will be with us.
Bülent Öztürk grew up in Turkey. He left his family to come to Austria 8 years ago. The arrival of Haider's party in power has already, he says, sent a signal to his supporters.
I see some faces very relaxable and against me, but relaxable. Relaxed. Yeah, because they've won now. They are happy now because they won. It is now louder. We are hearing now louder. For example, if you're now in the tube station or on bus, it can be very easy to be that you're hearing, hey, you are the immigrant. You will be very fast out of Austria.
Was mag mit dich denn und dem?
Nein, gib das jetzt da rein.
At the Center for Children of Immigrants that Öztürk set up, the young people echo his worries and confirm his experience. Racism, they say, now has official approval.
Yes, last Monday I met some Nazis and they were standing before me, in front of me, and they look at me and talk something, and they laugh at me. And before they didn't do it, but they get stronger than before, I think.
Because of Mr. Haider's
Because of Mr. Haider, yes.
So they think they have permission
yes.
now?
Yes, they aren't afraid now.
The people feel strong now. His supporters, because he is now in the government, and they would like to. They like the situation now, and now they feel strong, and they think they can. Was heißt unterdrücken? Suppress the foreigners.
This is now Jörg Haider's trial, a trial by street protest and diplomatic pressure. As they take their crusade into the capital's dark streets, his opponents say Austria must contain him before his message and his method gain ground elsewhere in Europe.
Then, a few weeks later, an unexpected development. Haider announced he's resigning as leader of the Freedom Party, but he's keeping his job as governor of Carinthia. And while he may be out of the spotlight for now, his critics warn that he'll be back. Many observers predict his real goal is to become the next president of Austria. And that's all for this edition of News in Review. For CBC News, I'm Knowlton Nash. See you next time.
The oil companies are just fleecing the consumers.
Not happy about it.
I think it's unfair that they're going up so much.
I'd like to know when the prices are going to stop going up.
Oh, I think it's crazy. What are we going to do?